Okay, everybody live. I just want to remind everybody that this is being recorded on all the different platforms. So if you have your cameras on and you do not want your face recorded, please take this opportunity to turn your cameras off. And with that, I'm going to start. Welcome, welcome, welcome to the Product People Tuesday night offline event where we get wonderful persons throughout the product space that come and bring insights and knowledge that we get to share as part of our mission to share knowledge generously, us at Product People. And so with that, today we have Stephen Walker. He's the co-founder and CEO of Klu. I'm going to tell you a bit more about Stephen, or I'm going to let Stephen tell a bit more about himself in just a moment. Just a bit about me, your host. I'm John Freeman. I'm Associate Product Manager 2 at Product People. Been in product management, project management for about 5 years, various industries. I've got an MBA from UCLA. I'm not going to talk too much about me. That's enough about me for now because I want us to all think more about what Product People is. Product People is an organization that provides in-house product managers acting as interims in the event that your organization has a gap that needs to be filled, where you have a product manager that happens to be on maternity leave, or you're in between product managers and you want to keep the train moving. We're there to be in that position to help fill you out. In addition to that, part of our mission is to share knowledge generously. So we host events like the one that you are currently attending, where we do our best to inform persons of the latest and greatest insights in product management. And we're happy to be doing that again today. So before we start, we have a couple of questions that we'd like to ask. There should be something popping up in the chats in just a moment. And yeah, the two questions that we would like to ask. Oh, excuse me, that went forward. There we go. When it comes to adding generative AI to your product, which aspect do you find the most intriguing? And which real-world data point on running generative AI in production interests you the most? Please take a few moments to submit your answers, and we'll close the polls in, say, about 30 seconds or so. Alrighty, and so as we can see here, poll has closed. So when it comes to adding generative AI to your product, which aspect do you find the most intriguing? Looks like the number one is exploring new product possibilities. I know I selected that one myself. And which real-world data point on running generative AI in production interests you the most? It looks like it's a closer call, but impact on user experience and engagement has taken the lead. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand over the presentation to Stephen Walker. Again, he's the co-founder and CEO of Klu.ai. And Stephen, I'm going to hand this off to you.
Awesome. Thanks, John. Give me a second to share my screen. All right. I think everyone should be able to see this. So I'm going to be talking about generative AI for PMs. I think there's a lot to really talk about. What I've tried to do is narrow it down for you guys to really understand some key things about it. There's a lot of hype. Just a quick intro to myself. Before founding Klu, I led product management at a company called Product Board. If you're in product management, you're probably familiar with that. I spent the last 5 years basically scaling startups in Europe, and before that, I was in America, in the Seattle area, actually, at Amazon and Capital One. And prior to that, I ran a product studio for a bit over a decade. And the easiest way to kind of wrap your head around Klu, we're a bit secretive. So if you go and visit our website, it's more vibes than information at this moment. We built a platform that sort of abstracts away everything that you need to get into production. What I experienced in my previous companies is just the speed of iteration was very, very slow. And there were a lot of things that were needing to be done to recreate basically just the environment to run experiments. And as you know, as a PM, velocity is sometimes how you win, whether it's against your competitors or just really the speed in which you learn. So AI, this article came out in March. If you didn't read it, the author of this article suggests that we nuke all the unregistered GPU farms that are training AI. And so I can't agree enough. I'm here to tell you that we should shut everything down. AI safety is paramount. The machines are going to take over. This is happening. This is coming. I'm kind of full of shit. I'm not going to talk to you about that. This is my favorite joke. People with no idea about AI telling you it's going to take over the world. Meanwhile, all of the labeling engines are misclassifying cats as dogs. And the reality is we are so far from having any sort of generative AI or AI that's going to, do things that are nefarious. If anything, it's just the people behind it that will do the nefarious things. But what is going on? I will try to frame this a bit so that it's not just a bunch of opinions or vibes. We have kind of gone through some massive super cycles in the last 20 to 30 years. The internet was a massive one. I think we can all kind of admit that Google and Meta were big winners in this space. Cloud came out of this as well, especially AWS being forked out of Amazon is massive, as well as Snowflake. And then mobile as sort of a new paradigm in compute was massive. And you saw both platform players as well as new companies that were really just building services that had never been built before. And now we're entering this phase where there are many players, but I would say OpenAI is really state of the art. When I look at what our customers are using, people want to go and explore their options, but the reality is everyone is using OpenAI models and they want something that's high quality. And it's not really defined yet. And so I think when you hear people make definitive statements, I think the best thing to remember is that we're at the very beginning and things often change. And if you were to go back to the mid 90s, for instance, Google was a laggard in terms of search engines. And, you would not have bet on Google being the dominant search engine or the dominant search player. And so I just think it's very, very wise as a PM to keep an open mind and kind of work from first principles rather than just working from what other people are saying. And AI is kind of this BS term that we just label everything with. The reality is that it's machine learning and that there's a wide range of things. And if you go back and you look at history, like ML is everywhere. And so this idea that it just suddenly showed up and it's going to take over the world, I think is a little bit ridiculous. And we've been working on this a lot over the decades. The big shift that happened, and I won't go super deep into this, but the transformer as a technology was invented, and it was just a new way of running models, and it greatly shifted where things were going. And so you kind of have this fork in the road where you have sort of this classic machine learning, especially around text that was going on, to where we're at now with large language models. And the transformer is actually used in audio and video and imagery as well. It's just a way of kind of, the easiest way to think about it is you just hold in your memory the context of what came before and the probabilities of what will come next. And so when people say that AI is going to take over the world, the easiest argument is that it's just calculating the most probable thing that has already happened before. And so the reality is it's just really good autocomplete. And so there'll be some red threads that go through all of the content that I'll talk through today. But I'm couching this in this idea that as a product manager who is working on generative AI or exploring generative AI features in your product, you really have three concerns. And the rest of the concerns are really valid, but you need to be deferring to people on your team, engineering or someone else when it comes to, is there latency around the APIs and things like that. And the first is user experience. And so, if you have a bad product, you're not going to retain your customers. And so you really need to make sure that you're constantly improving that. The next is once you've hit that great experience, you're going to have a new problem, which is people use your product so much that it starts destroying your margins. And so you need to start thinking about how to have trade-offs in terms of which model to use, or that's probably the time you should start thinking about, should you train your own model, or should you move off of something that's like an API-based model that you're using. And then last is time to market. And so the interesting thing about this, in my opinion, is that competition really does matter, especially in the minds of your customers. If you're able to quickly innovate and really quickly start defining what a new feature set is for your category, especially if it's good, that's going to capture the mind share of people. I think there's a lot of literature and kind of talk about, like measuring 8 times and making sure things are out there. And like, by the time it's done, you're 2 years into a project. The reality is moving quickly actually really defines who the winners are. It doesn't always mean that you're going to stay there, but I think it's very important. This visual, in my opinion, explains why there is so much hype. And so this is across generative AI for text, image, and speech. This is basically the delta from median human performance across these models. And in 2017 is when the transformer was invented. And so you can see at the time of invention, you're basically like 1 standard deviation away from average human performance. And in 2022, we crossed the median. And like, what does this mean? It means that when you go to a generative model and you say, write me a blog about something, it means that the text that comes out of that is above average compared to if you'd gone to a friend and asked them to write that same blog. And so this is the easiest way to think about this, is that you're not necessarily going to get new and novel things that come out of the models, but you're going to get better than average. And so this is why, in my opinion, it feels very much like there is some true AI or some true sort of intelligence behind the models, because most of us are not that great. Like I can't compose a song, or I'm very bad at drawing. And so anything that the model does is going to be far beyond my capabilities. But I can write an article about AI. And so I can actually sit there and look and judge kind of how bad the writing is. And so I would say, like, if you ever feel like, there is truly some intelligence there, I would say just go interact with a model where you have some domain expertise, and you can really start to see where it falls down and it's actually not that great. That said, the easiest way to think about this is if you have a task that you would delegate to an intern, the models are at a place where you should definitely delegate it to them. If your task is something you would never give to an intern, definitely don't offload it to a generative model. You're only going to end up in a worse spot. And you can think about the same with code. Someone has a really good saying about this, that code is basically kind of like codified thought and like really thinking through how to solve a problem. The AI can't do that. It's just auto-completing what has been done before. And so the code that you're going to get from a generative model is basically that of an intern. They're just regurgitating something they saw before. They have no sort of like critical thinking or learned experience from the domain that you're working in. The other thing to talk about in terms of performance, and I'll kind of tie this together so you understand where I'm going with this, is the GPT-3.5 Turbo model. In February, you got 1,000 tokens in about 11 seconds. By May, this had slowed greatly, and there were a lot of opinions that, like, OpenAI was not going to make it, and it was not a place to bet on. And that same 1,000 tokens, it was about 40 to 50% slower. As of the end of July, when we did the last benchmarking, it's about 7 seconds, and so it's greatly improving. And for the 16K context window version of it, it's the same speed. And so the way to think about this is not only are the capabilities of the underlying models getting better, but the systems that are deploying this and letting you use this in production, they're also getting better. And this is just over, a 5-month period. If you kind of extrapolate that out over years, it's easy to imagine how this is going to get better. The reason I point this out is a lot of PMs I talk to, they say, oh, we're not going to do X because, this is so slow or it's not great. The reality is once you've figured out what the feature is and why customers will like it, the underlying technology will have improved and it will continue to improve. And your competitors are definitely already looking at this. And so having some sort of rationale to not explore the space because it's slow, there's enough energy and effort going into it that won't always be the case. I won't go super deep into this, but the reality is GPT-4 is the highest quality model. There's kind of no way around it. If you read any of the open source papers, they're always benchmarking themselves against GPT-4 or GPT 3.5. Claude is sort of the runner-up. The thing that Claude has going for it is the incredible speed. And this is a bit old, where Google Chat Bison seems like it is kind of slow, but actually it's very, very fast. And so I can say from our production data, for instance, we had a customer that was doing translation between English and Georgian. Token per token, Georgian is not tokenized at the word level, it's at the character level. And so GPT-4 would take 5 minutes to translate basically 140 English words into Georgian. Claude can do it in about 15 seconds and Google Bison can do it in 2. And so there are use cases where you will likely want to explore which model is the right model for that use case. But more often than not, betting on OpenAI, if you don't have the time or the resources to do that exploration, is the way to go. And the way that I think about this, I don't have a crystal ball, so take it with a grain of salt, but this is the things that I believe in. OpenAI, today, you cannot fine-tune GPT-4 or GPT 3.5 for your use cases. You have to do it on older models. They're going to deploy the ability to do this by the end of this year, early next year. And so by next summer, you'll be able to fine-tune GPT-4, which is like the state-of-the-art model for your use case, which means that if you have a specific sort of task that you want to tune it to, or you have a tone of voice that you want to use and continuously use, you'll be able to do that. The next is a lot of people go towards open source because they think that it's a more privacy-aware option. The reality is this is a false dichotomy. So today you can deploy GPT 3, 5, and 4 in Azure spaces. You completely control those deployments. The data doesn't go anywhere. OpenAI has been very vocal about how they don't use your data when you go to their APIs as well. AWS and Google Cloud have also announced their ability to deploy things like Anthropic Claude in those clouds. And so this idea that you have to go with open source or you have to build your own model because of privacy, this is just false. And unless you have geniuses at your company, you're never going to come close. And so I would say when you start having these debates about rolling your own model or deploying open source, I'll touch on open source a little bit later, but it's generally better for research and not better for production. And then lastly, is context length. And so this is just how much content you can send to the model at any given time. This is greatly increasing. We don't have any breakthroughs that will let us send, like, let's say, 1 million tokens at a time. But in terms of what you actually need for your use cases, I think this won't be a concern by next summer. And so, as I mentioned around open source, there's a lot of great choice in terms of both proprietary models and open source models. And you can kind of see over time, they just keep getting better and better. My point with open source is, unless you are doing something where you're doing true ML research, like inventing new ways to utilize a transformer or optimize a transformer, or inventing new ways to like inject information into the model, I think there's not really a reason to deploy an open source model. And we ran the numbers, and you basically need around 440,000 requests per day from a GPT 3.5 model to hit the break-even point of deploying basically a llama-sized model in your own infrastructure. And so very few of the customers or startups or businesses that we know are actually at that sort of scale where they have, on the order of 500,000 requests per day. So some things to think about when it starts going out, and this really impacts that user experience. Latency is very unique to large language models. It takes a while to start and finish. You probably played with ChatGPT and things like this. You notice that it streams. The reason it does that is because otherwise you'd be sitting there and waiting for the response to come out, and that can take 30 seconds to 60 seconds. Most people don't want to wait that long. The way to mitigate that is through the streaming or like other clever UX methods. So you can do things like kind of showing that the model is reading, and then it's like writing a message, and then it starts streaming out. Very similar to how you text people in real life. You can see the person read the message, you can see that they're typing, etc. And so I think there are things you can do to kind of mask over this and like give the impression of speed. And also moving to smaller models. Smaller models always can be faster. Margins. I know I just said stay away from open source models. The reality is, if you've hit that 500,000, 1 million requests per day kind of scale, you're going to want to start looking into open source models. Or if you have a use case, for instance, we had a customer that started with doing trust and safety with a GPT-4 model. That's just data labeling. You can actually start on GPT-4, gather your data set, and then go and train your kind of fixed model that only does that task. And so there are paths to improving margins. I would say you want to get started quickly and then actually have the problem of margins being eaten versus worrying about that up front, because most people never actually hit that. Reliability is an issue. I don't have a screenshot of the uptime, but the APIs frequently go down. I think it will get better over time, but the easiest way to mitigate that is just have a fallback. In our system, we just sort of build in retries and some other capabilities so that you can make that more reliable. And then a lot of people want to add their private information to models, and they often use the phrasing, I want to fine tune, or I want to like train a model. This is actually typically wrong. What you want to do is something called RAG, or retrieval augmented generation. And what's happening there is you're just kind of doing a query at the same time the user hits in a prompt, and you retrieve some relevant information and you show that information to the model in addition to the prompt. And that just grounds it in that private knowledge. And so you kind of minimize hallucinations, and you also maximize what it knows about whatever that use case is. I'm going to go quickly through this because I've got a few more slides. Generative AI is creative, despite the fact that it's not coming up with novel insights. It's probabilistically generating things. And so you can actually ground this quite well with few-shot prompting, which I'll show in a bit. The next is hijacking. So once you've hit scale or you're in a consumer business, you will have people who try to do nefarious things with your systems. There's some really easy techniques to get around this, but basically you're just putting something in the middle, no matter how you're tackling this, that filters out the request before it goes to LLM. The next is privacy. So you can deploy in the private cloud. We've also built in our system sort of like a redaction system. And so you can like take out all of the objects and replace them with like company one, name one, etc. The models are really good at reasoning. They don't need the person's actual name or the company's actual name in there. And so you don't have to worry about needing to send private information to still kind of get the power of LLMs. And then sometimes people are doing very similar type things. So like, for instance, if you deploy, let's say a Q&A agent inside of your organization to help people find out like how much vacation time they have this year and what the policies for something are, and you're like a 10,000 person company, you're going to have a lot of people asking the same question. So you're going to want to use caching. It's a super easy sort of fix where you're going to the database instead of going to the model. And so the way to think about optimizing from kind of like cheapest to most expensive, I'll start from the bottom. RLHF, this is just sort of setting up a very intricate system of providing feedback to the models. The joke I'm currently in Silicon Valley, and the joke in Silicon Valley is RLHF is like sex in high school. Everyone's talking about it, no one's doing it. And so it's unlikely that you're doing this, but if you really want to build a great experience, you know, or a similar type thing like ChatGPT, you will need to do this. And the easiest way to think about this is just like an intern, where an intern shows up to your work and they don't know what good looks like and they don't know how to operate, but they maybe are educated. You need to give them sort of small tasks, and you need to like give them feedback, and you need to give them guidance and correction. And you need to say, hey, come back and like, let's try this again. You need to treat LLMs or models in the exact same way. In terms of model fine tuning, there are some techniques where you can fine tune. I would say generally, I don't want to completely discourage it, but I think 9 times out of 10, you actually don't need this. But you can do it. And there are some people that do need to do this. And the good news is it's a relatively stable sort of setup. And then if you're using something like OpenAI, they actually have APIs to do it very easily. In terms of retrieval augmented generation, doing embeddings and retrieval, this is probably the easiest way to ground and optimize your generative AI experience for your use cases. So like, what do I mean by this? It means like if you're doing something like a chatbot for support, you can embed all of your support documents, and then it will give answers based on those documents. And so this is something you can iterate on, you know, multiple times in a week. And then prompt engineering, this is where you're going to get the most leverage. And I'll just show you an example. So single and few shot prompting, this just means you're showing examples of like what you wanted to output. And so here's an actual prompt template where, you know, I've said, you know, I want you to do these things. And then I just show you 2 examples. The literature kind of says you should do 2 to 5. What I've found is actually it starts degrading over time, and that you probably only need to do 2. 1 is usually not enough if it's complex for it to kind of pick up on the pattern of what you want it to do. But I would say, again, that 9 times out of 10 for your use case, if you have a well-designed prompt with some examples, you can probably get it off and going in about an hour. And there's very few sort of product experiences that you can say that about. So I'll just kind of recap. RLHF, high technical expertise, high operational expertise in terms of making that happen. Model fine-tuning, also you need high technical expertise. I wouldn't recommend doing this without a data science team. For the other 2 options, document embedding and prompt engineering, your classic EPD teams, engineers, PMs, and designers can do this. And so the good news is you can actually do a lot of optimization for your products without having to get cycles from a data science team. Or if you don't have a data science team, you don't actually need them. So I said I would leave you with a framework for how to think about this. The reality is thinking through GenAI features is no different than any of your other functionality. And what I like to ask people is like who your power user is. You should be able to go find people like this user on LinkedIn really easily. If you can't say, this is the person, this is what they do, this is the kind of company they work in, you actually don't know your user well enough if you can't do that search. Then you want to know, like, what superpower do you give them? And so most of the time, what you're actually doing is just saving them work in your application. And so there's something that they do that actually is very time intensive, or it's very difficult and just people don't do it. And so that's your opportunity to really improve it on the B2B side. On the B2C side, there's all kinds of crazy stuff. I would say it's less about superpower and it's more about just, does the person feel excited? Measuring vibes is difficult, but also like not a bad thing. Like if you go and test with users and they're so excited about it, it's usually a good signal. And then lastly is word of mouth. So like, why would they tell others about your product? And so I'll give you a concrete example. I use this app called Perplexity. It's the only product that's a generative AI product that I often talk about. Perplexity does 2 things, and it does it really well. 1, it uses GPT-4, and 2, it uses Google. And what it does, you can see here, it's considering 31 sources. It takes this prompt, it goes to Google, and it goes and figures out who the F is John L, and what is Founders Fund, and what do I need to know, and it assembles those things. And this sort of research before this meeting would have taken me, 30 to 45 minutes. This takes me like, 2 minutes now. And so that's the easiest way to think about it. So like if I were to reverse engineer that, who would be a power user of this? Well, in this case, I'm a CEO. I don't have tons of time, and I need some things done really quickly. What's the superpower? The things that used to take me an hour now take me 5 minutes. And this is, like I mentioned, the only product that I tell people about that I actually use on a daily or weekly basis. And so when you're trying to find product market fit, it's no different than any other product. You need a worthy problem, right? It needs to be something that people actually do or spend time caring about. You need to have, oops, I forgot the why. You need to have a worthy solution, which means you need to explore as many possible solutions to solve that problem. And then once you have a winning solution, you need to optimize it. And one of the most famous generative AI features is GitHub Copilot. GitHub Copilot, they had 6 to 12 months of a lot of different iterations of what it could be before they landed on the in IDE autocomplete. And then once they landed on that, they spent before launch, they spent a massive amount of time just optimizing that use case. And it's been out now, I don't know, 18 months, something like that. They're basically just optimizing this, as well as sort of expanding, now that you have that, what are the things that you'd want to be able to do? Because that is sort of something that's put into your, your usage pattern. And so if you kind of think about what I just described, I talked about really, really long periods of time. So you need to find a way to get your experiment cycle times as small as possible, because you want to have as many sort of at-bats or reps in terms of finding the right solution. And then once you've found the right solution, you need to very, very rapidly iterate, because it's the only way that you're going to optimize it. And this should not sound like new advice. This is the same advice you're probably getting for any other product. And so that's it. I'll see you on the internet.
Well, thank you very much, Stephen. Just give me one moment. I'm going to share my screen again. Okay. And can everybody see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, this is the time for everybody, regardless of what platform that you are on, be it YouTube, be it LinkedIn, be it here on Zoom, please go ahead and submit your questions to the chat. We're going to be collecting all of those questions from the various platforms, and I'll be asking those questions to Stephen on your behalf. In the meantime, while we're collecting those questions, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about Product People. So Product People is a consulting agency, and what we do is we provide product management as a service. So what that means is, in the event that your organization is having a gap in your product management capabilities, meaning your product manager is going on a parental leave, perhaps your product manager is left and you believe that there's going to be some time before you're going to be able to fill that role within your organization. Well, we come in and we provide product management services where we're acting as the active product manager for your product during a fixed period of time. And when I say we're product management as a service, that means you're hiring product people. You're not just hiring John, you're hiring me as well as several of my colleagues. That way, in the event that something happens where I have to take sick leave or something along those lines, we're not pausing that contract. We're continuing to work with you and continuing to build your product in this interim fashion. We also provide product coaching and consulting, offering best practices and helping your organization get from where it is to where it wants to be in terms of developing your product management organization. We also help with product discovery as well, getting us from 0 to 1 in some cases. What we're not doing, we are not recruiters. We are not freelance marketplace, meaning if you work with Product People, everybody that you are working with is actually a product person, employee of Product People. And we're not a development and design agency, although with maybe some generative AI, maybe we'll start doing that. That's a joke. Some of our clients that we've worked with in the past, some big names that you've probably seen, Zalando Free Now. Some of our B2B clients, some that you've seen, maybe the WHO, World Health Organization. People love working with us. We've gotten a ton of fantastic feedback. We're super happy and proud of the work that we've been doing. And we have been doing over 200 missions at this point. We've got 40 product persons under our umbrella. We're all happy, wonderful. Look at us. We're good looking people. Don't you want to work with us? We're great. And we're hiring. We're going to put this link in the chat later in this presentation. But for now, we're going to get back to the questions. I'll start with the first question I see in the chat. Stephen, do you see a reduction in training data if more and more people just create content via AI? Will we see less innovative and exciting content as much more AI is generated? And that comes from Alex Ball, who's also a product person. He works for product people.
This is a great question. The first question is, let me maybe say that differently, in that there's less content to potentially train models on because you don't want to train it on AI generated content. There are a lot of opinions about this. I personally think you want to train primarily on human generated content. And the reason is we create very novel things. We come up with new ideas, new explanations. We come up with new terms of phrase. And so I think that's actually the most valuable training data. I also think this idea that we've run out of training data is actually very false. We maybe ran out of like low-hanging fruit that you don't have to pay for in terms of training data. The second part is, will we see less innovative and exciting content? My personal opinion is yes. I think if you go to Google, just go to Google and type in product management and tell me if the first 10 results are actual pieces of content you want to read. And that's not with AI. That's just humans gaming the content strategy SEO system. And so when generating content is practically free, I think you're going to see a flood of AI generated content. I think what it does is it puts a price or it prizes really high quality content even higher because it is going to be much more differentiated. Those are kind of long-winded answers to your questions. The short versions of it is no and yes.
Awesome. Thank you for that answer. The next question I have is, you mentioned that you envision for AI for the next summer. So what's happening by next summer? What do you envision in the next 5 years?
I mean, this is hard, but if you look at that slide that I shared where, we went from being basically like one deviation under human performance in 2017 to being at par with human performance. I think in 5 years' time, we're going to have much stronger models. I think text-based models are the most mature. Video is just starting to take off a little bit. Audio is just starting to take off a bit. I think we're going to make really, really big strides in those areas. I do think that the power of the current capabilities of machine learning, the transformer-based models as they stand today, that it's about being able to generate sort of like known content really cheaply and really easily. And I think you can do a lot of very interesting things around this, whether it's in business, you can do a lot of workflow automation. In consumer products, you can create really engaging chat experiences. You can do really great coaching and education. I was talking to one of my childhood friends, who had a tutor as a kid, and not everyone was able to have a tutor. The world's going to greatly change when everyone has an on-demand, sort of bot that they can chat with about topics and understand it. And even I do this where like I don't understand a concept, and so I say start, as if I'm, 10 years old, and it's like, okay, this is too stupid. Move it up to 15. Okay, I understand it. Now move it up to 20. Okay, now like move it up to a PhD student. And it's like, oh, okay, let's go back and then like let's work our way back up there. And so this idea that you can have this patient, fake person work with you to understand concepts, I think that's going to really greatly impact the world. And then my opinion about audio and video models, I think gaming will become a lot more interesting. I think Hollywood is having a lot of issues with what's going on right now, but I think the monopoly on beauty and the salary that you can demand because you're a beautiful person, I think it's going to go closer to the person who does the craft services. Because the reality is, if the actor doesn't want to get scanned, there's someone else who's beautiful that will get scanned, and there's someone who will come in and do a day's job at market rate to be the like quote unquote actor that then gets a pretty face put on. And so I think a lot of how we've sliced the economy, I think will change over the next 5 years. But I think it's, David Deutsch is a physicist. He has this idea of universality, that on a long enough time horizon, things sort of become universal. And this is one of the few truths that I kind of hold. And so if you think about what that means, it just means that the ability to do great work or interesting things will become democratized across more people, which means it's cheaper, which means you can't make as much money on trying to do those things. Then I think the people who do exceptional work, whether they're artists or writers or developers, those people will continue to be able to command a premium. But yeah, I think we'll be in an interesting time over the next 5 years.
Very cool. I can say from personal experience, I thank you, ChatGPT, for being my German tutor as I studied for my exam. Next question. What do you think of new roles being introduced where the sole responsibility is effectively scouring and using AI?
Excuse me. Can you say that one more time? The new roles for a second?
Yeah, being introduced where the sole responsibility is effectively scouring and using AI. I've heard of these as prompt engineers, is what I've read them as.
Yeah, I think this is very much this is a job to be done. Whether this is permanently a role, I think remains to be seen. And I think some companies like to compartmentalize and slice and break down roles to be very, very specific. And some companies have more generalist roles. So I think this is a thing. If you go back like 20 years ago, I don't know how old our audience is, but there were people who would say things like, oh, you're so good with Google, right? Like, but you don't have like professional Googlers, right? Like we all kind of just adapted to like how to use a search engine, or the search engine adapted to how humans actually interact with it. And so I think we'll have a bit of both, but I think prompt engineering is very much a thing. The way to think about this, in my opinion, is it's just business logic. And so you're giving an instruction set to a model. And that's why I use the intern metaphor. It's the same as if you're a manager and you have these people who don't know how they should be behaving in the role. You need to sort of describe that to them. So that's kind of how I think about that.
Yeah, thank you. We've got a question about Klu. Which industries will Klu mainly work with, on which applications? If you can unveil a little bit more about Klu, we'd love to hear more.
Yeah, we're primarily in sort of the B2B space, but not entirely. Our current customers, they kind of span two like really broad use cases. One is they have an existing SaaS product that they're extending, or two, they have some workflows internally that they're automating. For the existing SaaS products, doing things like, the slash command in Notion where you can generate content. Our customers want to do things like that, but they tend to have other use cases that need some more context. So we have like an HR company where when they hit the slash command, it's taking in sort of the context that, you're writing an onboarding email, you're this role, and like this is the person that you're onboarding. And so it has kind of more awareness to what's going on. And then for the internal use cases, we have a private equity firm that uses us to do like contract analysis and lead scoring. And so it's basically someone in the company used to take an extract from a system of like, here's your leads to go reach out to. Instead of having to like go and qualify, is the website on, do they actually do this business, et cetera. They use Klu to kind of score it for them and tell them, yeah, this is a good lead. And then they spend more time reaching out and talking to that business. So if you send me a note on LinkedIn, I'm happy to share more with you. And actually, like if you do digging, we're not hard to find. There's our docs, which is like both kind of the user guide plus like the developer docs. So yeah.
Awesome. Sounds like some pretty exciting stuff. And here's a follow-up question that's related. Excuse me for the person who wrote this. I'm going to expand a little bit on what you wrote. They said, how can we leverage generative AI to upsell to existing clients in B2B? And I'm thinking this is more of a general thought about what current Gen AI products may exist that just have a general application that can be applied pretty much to any B2B service.
Yeah. In terms of upselling, I mean, why do people buy software in businesses? They're trying to get something done. They're trying to generate more revenue for the business, or they're trying to reduce cost. And so like, if you can draw a line between that feature set and those objectives, it's no different than any other feature. And so I think that's the easiest way to think about it. It's the same as if you had shipped like a new vertical or new like product or new feature set. You're probably doing it because you can solve some sort of problem and you're delivering value and you're capturing value. You should be doing the same thing with generative AI.
Yeah, that makes sense. As a PM, how should I get buy-in from customer for inclusion of generative AI in the product? Is there any recommendations about how to communicate the usage of generative AI at these early stages of this new phase?
Yep. I think this advice is applicable to any PM doing any project. You need to show, not tell. And so you should show up with a plan and like a demo of something and like a good explanation of why you want to do this. And then you should de-risk it for whoever you're trying to get approval for, right? And so like, the reality is your boss is trying to get a promotion or trying not to get fired or is trying to take over the company. I don't know, whatever their kind of like, political motivations are inside the org, right? Like you need to be mindful of that. And you need to basically make it easy for them to say yes. So like one of the things that I always say for any project is show up with some homework already done, show up with visuals, be like, here's what we want to do. If you have a demo, right? Like, even if it's just directional, like here's kind of how we're thinking about it. And then say like, hey, like we want 4 weeks to go noodle on this. Or we want next week. We're not going to do anything but this for 1 week and then we'll regroup on Friday, right? Like you want to just reduce the timelines so that it has this immediacy and it has accountability, because most pitches have neither of those. There's no immediacy and there's no accountability. And so like, if you go there and you say like, hey, we're going to explore this thing, we don't know what it is, like, why would you say yes to that? Right? Like that's not something that you would say yes to. The nice thing about generative AI is that you can prototype very, very easily. And so like one of the reasons why we built Klu is like, we have customers basically do design sprints, like they do AI sprints with Klu, because you can have a prototype in a day that's running. You don't have to use Klu. You can go use ChatGPT. You can tell it, you're I don't know, you're something else, and this is the use case, and I want to, do this thing, and like it will come close enough that like if you really have no resourcing, you can make some sort of demo. And I highly recommend just recording a video and being like, here's the demo, right? Like get people excited.
Yeah, so product management 101 a little bit. Appreciate that. So going back, you gave a really cool example about showing, the superpower that you building that dossier. Somebody asked, what was that tool that you used to build that dossier?
Yeah, it's called Perplexity.
Perplexity.
I put it in the chat.
Awesome, thank you. So you mentioned earlier that we shouldn't let the current stage of the technology slow us down from envisioning new, exciting opportunities that we can leverage generative AI. But on the opposite end of the spectrum, maybe there are some sorts of technologies or maybe some solutions, so to speak, that don't really have a proper use case. Are there any examples that you can think of where generative AI at this stage, or maybe even next year to 5 years, doesn't really make sense to pursue?
Yeah. You guys have probably all seen like Auto GPT and Baby AGI and like Small Engineer, whatever, Tiny GPT Engineer, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All of these are entertainment. The novelty of what's happening tricks our brains into thinking that there's actually something here. And this is kind of like, it blurs the line. It looks like there's a use case when there's not. And because it's producing content, you kind of think that it's doing something. And so I don't know if that's what you had in mind when you asked this question, but if you're doing something that is sort of like, you can give it a goal, an objective, and it kind of runs away with it. I think it's not the case. That said, there's some times where you do need some exploration. I'm a huge fan of it. At our company, for instance, we do a hackathon every 2 months. We have a 1-week hackathon, and the purpose of it is, I stole this idea from actually, I can't remember the guy's name. Anyways, in the 1940s, there was a guy who worked with the US military to invent new technology. And he came up with this idea that you need to get people out of their day-to-day, because when you're just kind of stuck in the same environment, you have a hard time imagining new things. And so we do this hackathon, not because we're trying to produce anything, but just to like create a different environment to have people think differently. And most of the time, nothing comes out of it. And sometimes you get something special out of it. And so I do think this idea of play is very, very important. As a PM, you're incentivized not to play, right? Like your entire job is to only do things that matter. And so I think you need to find a way to reconcile that. If you have some sort of instinct or belief that there's something there and it should be explored, just time box it, right? You can control the amount of time that you spend in that exploration phase. And if you don't find anything, you don't find anything. And if you feel you have this conviction that there's something there, then time box it again and go back to it in some other period of time after you've gotten some real work done. But yeah, hopefully that's helpful.
Great, thank you. Okay, I don't see any additional questions in the chat at the moment. I think I have one additional question. You mentioned earlier that you don't see, in the immediate future, generative AI itself being, a source of it can't itself be the bad actor, but bad actors can potentially use it for some negative applications. Do you foresee any time in the near future, be it 10 years, be it 20 years, where AI actually does get to a point where it is a true general intelligence that is something that we should be a little scared of?
So I generally believe in the 2030s, definitely by the 2040s, we'll figure it out, some sort of general intelligence. And I think the easiest way to think about it is these are non-biological kids. And with kids, you can instill values and you can teach them your belief system and we have many nations around the world. And so we've demonstrated that there's no single path of demonstrating values and belief systems. And it works. I would imagine it's the same thing. Like this is why I think AI alignment is a hoax, because just with children have their own thoughts and beliefs, and they will grow up and they will decide things on their own, no matter what you tell them. And so I think we should, in my opinion, I think we should focus more cycles on how we can improve humanity and how we can actually work together to sort of celebrate the things that make us, unique and different and alike, rather than worry about something that's we have no control of. Like, if we really invent an AI that is truly intelligent, it will make its own decisions. It will rethink its own values. It will come to its own conclusions about things. And it's just kind of, I think that's something that people don't want to admit to, but it's no different than children growing up and becoming adults.
Mm. Yeah, so our AI children need some really good parents, it sounds like, help guide them along that way. Like that,
Yes.
that Marshall McLuhan quote, man is essentially the sex organ of the machine world, and we're creating these things. These are our offspring. We need to be very much aware of that. Okay, we're all out of questions. Hey, Stephen, again, thank you so much for this. This was a fascinating presentation. I know I learned a lot. I took a lot from this. I'm not sure what's happening on my screen because it's frozen. There we go. We're at the thank yous part. Evan, if you could please dump some links in here. We've got links to our website at Product People, my LinkedIn. If anybody would like to connect with me, I'd be happy to talk to you about the work that we do. If you're interested in being a speaker, if you heard this and you thought you could add some value and be a speaker for Product People in one of these events, happy to help facilitate that conversation as well. And as I mentioned before, if anybody's interested in working for Product People, we are in fact hiring at our associate level, and please click the appropriate link for that. And with that, we're going to end the live stream. Again, I see the thank yous rolling in. We'll end the live stream. And Stephen, if you don't mind sticking around, but everybody else will be asking you to please to exit. And if not, Evan will